Bright lights flooded the grand hall, crystal chandeliers casting shimmering reflections on the polished wooden floor. At 7:45 p.m., the backstage of the Royal Theatre was buzzing with tension, while outside, the front row seats were already occupied by the most powerful figures in the city. All of them eagerly awaited the performance of Amelia, the brightest ballet star of her generation. Behind the stage, however, was a completely different scene. The atmosphere was thick with anxiety. Dancers hurried back and forth, technicians rushed to adjust the props, and the sound of frantic footsteps echoed through the narrow corridors. Yet, what made the tension truly unbearable was the fact that Amelia was missing. "Where is Amelia?" The assistant director's voice trembled with panic, eyes scanning the crowd. "No one has seen her for over an hour," a dancer whispered, their voice laced with worry. James Holloway, the owner of the theater, stood silently in the corner, fingers tightening around his wineglass. He frowned slightly as the murmurs spread. Outwardly, he remained calm, but his sharp gaze swept through the backstage with suspicion. A prima ballerina disappearing just before a performance? This was not something to be ignored. Marina, the stage manager, rushed in, breathless, sweat forming on her forehead. "I checked Amelia's dressing room. The door was open, the lights were still on, but she wasn't there. Her phone is unreachable." James Holloway's jaw clenched, his voice low and icy. "Check all exits. Ask security if anyone left the theater without permission." A security guard stepped forward, his voice carrying a trace of unease. "No one saw Amelia leave through the main entrance. Or the back. If she left, it wasn't the usual way." The tension thickened. Dancers exchanged nervous glances. Amelia wasn't the kind of person to run away. She had never missed a performance before. "Did she say anything earlier?" Marina asked, her voice urgent. "No, she came to rehearsals as usual this morning, but she seemed uneasy, kept looking over her shoulder, like someone was following her," a dancer whispered. James Holloway remained silent, eyes flicking to his golden pocket watch. 15 minutes until curtain rise. "Someone check the security footage immediately," Holloway ordered. Hurried footsteps echoed through the backstage. No one spoke, but everyone could feel it. Something was terribly wrong at the Royal Theatre. 7:55 p.m. Royal Theatre Security Room. The small, dimly lit room was illuminated only by the bluish glow of multiple surveillance screens, casting eerie shadows across the tense faces of the security staff. They worked frantically, fingers flying over keyboards, rewinding and fast-forwarding through footage in search of any clue about Amelia's disappearance. Sergei, the theater's senior security officer, narrowed his eyes as the main screen displayed a familiar scene, the long hallway leading to dressing room number 6. "There, 7:30 p.m., Amelia enters her dressing room," Sergei announced, his voice taut with tension, every eye in the room locked onto the screen. 7:12 p.m. Amelia appeared in the hallway. She wore a long coat, her handbag clutched tightly in one hand. But something was off. She kept glancing over her shoulder, as if someone was following her. 7:45 p.m. She reached dressing room number 6 and stepped inside. 7:09 p.m. The screen glitched violently. A sharp, ear-piercing static noise filled the room as thick, distorted lines streaked across the monitor. It was as if someone had deliberately tampered with the feed. Sergei slammed his fingers against the keyboard, desperately trying to restore the image, but nothing worked. "Damn it! Why did the camera fail right at that moment?" one of the guards cursed. 7:22 p.m. The footage suddenly returned to normal. Dressing room number 6 was empty. No Amelia, no one else. Only a pair of white ballet shoes neatly placed on the floor. A suffocating silence fell over the security room. A cold chill ran down everyone's spine. "Where did she go?" a guard stammered. "No one entered, no one left. She couldn't have just vanished into thin air," Sergei muttered, eyes still glued to the screen. James Holloway, who had been watching from the back, narrowed his eyes. "Check all hallway cameras. I want to know what the hell just happened," he ordered. Another security officer frantically rewound footage from different angles. But the result was the same. No one had entered or exited dressing room number 6 during that time frame. Amelia had disappeared. No trace, no note. Only fear now lingered within the theater's walls. Over 24 hours after Amelia's disappearance, the press exploded. Sensational headlines flooded social media and the front pages of major newspapers. Ballet star vanishes moments before performance, a mystery that shakes the art world. The police arrived at the Royal Theatre to investigate. Detective Richard Owens, a middle-aged white man with a piercing gaze, stood before a crowd of reporters and announced, "We are doing everything we can to find Amelia. At this time, there is no evidence of foul play or abduction. It is possible that she left voluntarily for personal reasons." Elijah Carter, a seasoned investigative journalist for Truth and Justice, narrowed his eyes at Owens. He had seen too many cases like this. When a woman disappeared, especially one who wasn't from the upper class, the police were quick to dismiss it without thorough investigation. After the press conference, Elijah approached Owens. "Detective, Amelia isn't the kind of person who would just vanish. Do you have any evidence proving she left voluntarily?" Owens smirked. "You're not going to turn this into a race issue again, are you, Carter? Not every disappearance is a conspiracy." Elijah kept his composure, but anger burned inside him. This wasn't just a simple disappearance. Something was very wrong. The police quickly declared that Amelia had likely run away. No signs of struggle. No witnesses reporting anything suspicious. But Elijah didn't buy it. He had seen this pattern before. When a black woman went missing, no one cared enough to dig deeper. Elijah sought out witnesses, but the police ignored his requests. Denied support, Elijah took matters into his own hands. He returned to the Royal Theatre, searching for anyone who might have seen something. Among them was Marcus, a black stagehand, who tensed up the moment he saw Elijah. "You're Carter, right? The investigative reporter?" Marcus spoke in a hushed tone, glancing around nervously. "That's me. Do you know anything about Amelia? I'm looking into her disappearance," Elijah replied, studying the tension on Marcus's face. Marcus looked down the empty hallway, then whispered, "I saw a man in black enter Amelia's dressing room. He wasn't staff. He wasn't a guest either. I reported it to the police, but they told me to stop imagining things." Elijah clenched his fists. This wasn't the first time the police ignored a black man's testimony. He met Marcus's eyes, his voice serious. "Can you describe him? Tall, slim, wearing a long coat and a hat. I couldn't see his face, but he had a large gold ring on his finger." Elijah jotted down the detail. A gold ring, a crucial clue. "Anything else? Did you hear anything?" Marcus swallowed hard, his voice slightly shaking. "I overheard Amelia arguing with someone on the phone that morning. She said, 'I don't want to do this anymore, let me go.' And then she disappeared." Elijah's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a disappearance. Amelia had been trying to escape something, or someone. "Are you scared, Marcus?" Elijah asked. Marcus let out a dry chuckle, but his eyes betrayed real fear. "You know how it is, Carter. People like us have to be careful when we decide to speak up." Elijah froze at Marcus's words. A familiar feeling crept through him. The injustice, the indifference of those in power, and the secrets buried to protect the elite. But this time, he wouldn't let it be silenced. Leaving the theater, Elijah reached out to an old contact, Catherine DuPont, a journalist known for exposing scandals within high society. "Carter, I thought you gave up investigative journalism," Catherine answered, her voice laced with amusement. "I need your help tracking down a name." Elijah hesitated before adding, "A gold ring with a distinct engraving. I need to know who it belongs to." A brief silence filled the line. Then Catherine spoke, her voice slower this time. "Well, Elijah, do you have any idea who you're dealing with? Those rings? They belong to an underground society made up of the most powerful politicians and businessmen in the city. If Amelia was involved with them, then this isn't just a disappearance." A cold chill ran through Elijah's veins. "Can you find me a list of people who wear those rings?" "I'll try, but be careful, Carter. If this case really ties back to them, Amelia won't be the only one in danger." Denied support, Elijah continued his own investigation. He returned to the Royal Theatre, searching for anyone who might have witnessed something. Among them was Marcus, a backstage crew member, who tensed up the moment he saw Elijah. "You're Carter, right? The investigative reporter?" Marcus lowered his voice, eyes darting around nervously. "That's me. Do you know anything about Amelia? I'm looking into her disappearance." Elijah studied the unease in Marcus's face. Marcus glanced down the empty hallway, then leaned in. I saw a man in black enter Amelia's dressing room. He wasn't staff. He wasn't a guest either. I reported it to the police, but they told me to stop imagining things. Elijah clenched his fists. This wasn't the first time police had ignored a black man's testimony. He met Marcus's eyes, his voice steady. Can you describe him? Tall, slim, wearing a long coat and a hat. I couldn't see his face, but he had a large gold ring on his finger. Elijah took notes, a crucial detail. The gold ring could be a lead. Anything else? Did you hear anything? Marcus swallowed hard, his voice slightly unsteady. I heard Amelia arguing with someone on the phone that morning. She said, I don't want to do this anymore. Let me go. And after that, she disappeared. Elijah's heartbeat quickened. This wasn't just a disappearance. Amelia had been trying to escape something or someone. Are you afraid, Marcus? Elijah asked. Marcus let out a dry chuckle, but fear flickered in his eyes. You know how it is, Carter. People like us have to be careful when we choose to speak up. Denied support, Elijah continued his own investigation. A black stagehand named Marcus recounted his experience. I saw a man in black enter Amelia's dressing room. I reported it to the police, but they told me to stop imagining things. Elijah jotted it down. This wasn't the first time the police had dismissed a black man's testimony, but he wasn't going to let it be ignored. Elijah knew he needed someone who understood the forces operating behind the scenes. He arranged a meeting with Catherine DuPont, a journalist specializing in exposing scandals among the elite. They met in a dimly lit cafe where the subdued lighting provided cover for sensitive conversations. You're diving into another dangerous case, Carter? Catherine smirked, but there was no amusement in her eyes. I don't have a choice, Elijah said, his voice heavy. Amelia knew something. She was trying to run, and now she's gone. Catherine leaned back in her chair and sighed. I looked into the gold ring you mentioned, Carter. The people who wear it, they're not the kind you want to cross. A secret society. The Order of Orion. A clandestine organization where politicians and powerful businessmen use the arts as a front for their darker dealings. Ballerinas like Amelia aren't just performers. Some of them play other roles. Elijah narrowed his eyes. What do you mean? I'm not entirely sure, but I've heard that Amelia wasn't her real name. She might have been a witness in an old case. And this society doesn't let people walk away if they know too much. His chest tightened. If Amelia wasn't really Amelia, then who was she? Elijah couldn't stop now. He traced Amelia's personal records, but everything seemed to have been systematically erased. There was no official record of her before the age of 18, no birth certificate, no school records, no financial history. She was a ghost that had appeared from nowhere. Then another name surfaced, Isabelle Laurent. Isabelle Laurent had been a key witness in a money laundering case involving a major corporation. And the man behind that corporation was James Holloway. A chill ran down Elijah's spine. Holloway wasn't just a theater owner. He had deep underground connections, connections powerful enough to make someone like Amelia disappear without a trace. As Elijah dug deeper into the Order of Orion, he discovered another influential figure linked to the case. Victor Langley, a wealthy politician closely tied to Holloway. Financial records obtained by Elijah revealed that Langley had transferred a large sum of money to the Royal Theater just days before Amelia's disappearance. Following a lead from one of Langley's former employees, Elijah received a cryptic message. Some secrets are never meant to be uncovered, Carter. Amelia knew too much, and she's not the only one they want silenced. Elijah now understood this case was far bigger than he had imagined. It wasn't just about a missing ballerina. It was about an entire system designed to bury its darkest crimes. But the biggest question remained. Where was Amelia, and was she still alive? Elijah pressed forward, piecing together the fragments of clues he had gathered. But the deeper he went, the more he uncovered a tangled web of power, corruption, and secrecy surrounding Amelia's disappearance. With the help of an anonymous hacker, Elijah managed to access Amelia's email account. In her outbox, he found an unsent message. I can't do this anymore. I know I'm just a pawn in their hands, but I refuse to continue. If I disappear, know that it wasn't my choice. Attached to the email was a file that had been deleted shortly before. Elijah clenched his jaw. Amelia knew something, a secret big enough to silence her. He had come too far to turn back now. Amelia's disappearance wasn't just an accident. It was a calculated move in a much larger criminal operation. He could feel the danger closing in. This time it was coming for him. But what haunted him even more than the threat to his own life was the injustice. The system that had spent years silencing people like him. Strange things began to happen. Elijah's phone received anonymous calls, but when he answered, there was only the sound of shallow breathing on the other end. His computer started running suspiciously slow, and once, he discovered that someone had logged into his account from an unknown location. It wasn't the first time he had been watched, but this time, it felt different, stronger, as if an invisible hand was pulling the strings around him. That night, when he returned to his apartment, his front door was slightly ajar. His heartbeat pounded in his chest as he reached into his pocket, gripping a small knife. Carefully, he pushed the door open. Nothing was out of place, but on the kitchen counter, a single sheet of paper lay neatly unfolded. "Stop now. If you don't, you'll be next." Elijah clenched the paper, his palms damp with sweat. This wasn't just a warning, it was a sentence. A message that if he kept going, his fate would be no different from Amelia's. But what enraged him most wasn't the threat, it was the way they thought a simple note would be enough to silence him. Taking a slow breath, Elijah reached for the lighter on the counter and set the paper ablaze, watching as it curled into ash. If they wanted him afraid, they had underestimated the wrong man. 2 days later, Elijah felt someone tailing him. As he walked past an empty street near the newsroom, a black car appeared in the distance. Its headlights were off, but it stayed close behind him. He quickened his pace, crossing the road. The car matched his every move. Turning into a narrow alley, he hoped to lose his pursuer. But when he glanced back, the car had stopped right at the alley's entrance. The tinted windows slowly rolled down, revealing nothing but darkness inside. Then a low voice spoke. "Carter, don't end up like Amelia. Some truths aren't meant to be uncovered." Elijah froze. The man's face was hidden in the shadows, but something in his voice sent a chill down Elijah's spine. "Is Amelia still alive?" Elijah asked, forcing his voice to remain steady. The man chuckled softly. "What do you think?" The engine roared as the car sped away, disappearing into the night, leaving Elijah standing alone in the middle of the street, a cold emptiness spreading in his chest. If Amelia was still alive, then where was she? And if she was dead, who would be next? Elijah returned to the newsroom, hoping to bring the story to light. But when he presented his evidence to the editor-in-chief, the white man sitting across from him merely shook his head. "Carter, you need to be more realistic. We can't publish a story based on speculation and a gold ring." "This isn't speculation. Amelia tried to escape from that secret society. I have proof they're watching me. I have witnesses. If we don't speak up, the editor interrupted, leaning back in his chair. "I'm not in the same position as you, Carter. I'm not questioned because of the color of my skin, but you are. If you keep pushing this story, you won't just lose your job, you might lose your life. And if that happens, I'm not sure anyone will care." The words cut deep, not because Elijah hadn't heard them before, but because they came from his own colleague, someone who was supposed to fight for the truth. To them, he was just another reckless black journalist, throwing himself into danger for a story no one wanted to hear. Elijah walked out, anger burning inside him. The door shut behind him, and at that moment he knew there was no one left to rely on. He was alone, but being alone didn't mean he would give up. He had no way back now. Every lead pointed to James Holloway, the man behind the Royal Theater, the one with deep ties to the elite in the Order of Orion. But Holloway wasn't just a wealthy man, he was someone who controlled the system itself. And Elijah? He was just a lone black journalist, standing against a world built to protect men like Holloway. Elijah Carter had been born and raised in the city's southern slums, where violence and poverty were as natural as breathing. His mother was a night shift nurse, his father a construction worker, until an accident took away his ability to work. Growing up, Elijah had watched people like his family get left behind, strangled by injustice. Instead of accepting his reality, he chose journalism, a path never easy for a black man from the projects. In the media industry, he was always underestimated. His stories were edited down, his work dismissed, and suspicion from the police and the elite never left him. But none of it made him stop. He had exposed political corruption, uncovered criminal conspiracies, and brought hidden truths into the light, even when it meant receiving anonymous threats. To Elijah, the truth wasn't something that could be buried forever, and Amelia's disappearance was the next truth he was determined to reveal. Elijah wasn't going to wait any longer. He arranged a meeting with Holloway at an upscale bar in the heart of the city where gold rings and tailored suits blended into the dim golden lighting. Holloway was already waiting in the VIP lounge, a cigar between his fingers, his expression calm but his eyes sharp. As Elijah approached, Holloway looked up, a smirk playing on his lips. "Carter, I've always wondered what makes someone like you think they can step into this world." He gestured for the waiter to pour another drink. "Do you think you can change something? Or are you just chasing some misguided sense of justice for people like you?" Elijah sat down, his gaze unwavering. "I just want to know where Amelia is." "I don't know what you're talking about. She disappeared. That was her choice." Elijah placed a USB drive on the table. "I have the footage. Hallway cameras, 7:35 p.m. that night. Amelia was taken from her dressing room by two men. One of them wore a ring just like yours." Holloway's brow furrowed slightly, but the smirk remained. Slowly, he lifted his glass, took a sip, and set it down. "So what do you plan to do with it?" "Expose it." Elijah's voice was steady. His eyes never left Holloway's. For the first time in their conversation, Holloway let out a deep, mocking laugh. "And who do you think will believe you, Carter?" He leaned forward, his voice lower. "A black journalist from the slums? A man whose whole career is built on writing stories no one reads? Do you think this society actually cares about your truth?" Elijah's fists clenched. This was how the system worked. They didn't need to kill him outright. They only needed to make him invisible, to make sure his story would be dismissed as irrelevant noise. "I don't need people to believe me." Elijah's voice was firm. "I just need the truth to be seen." Holloway tilted his head slightly, studying him. Then he leaned in, voice dropping into something closer to a threat. "Be careful, Carter. Not everyone is allowed to tell the truth, especially people like you." Elijah swallowed, but his eyes never wavered. "Then I'll be the first." Holloway smirked again, but this time his gaze carried something darker. As Elijah stood up, he felt the heavy atmosphere press around him. Walking out of the bar, he could feel eyes following him. His phone buzzed. A message from Catherine DuPont. "I found something. Meet me now, but be careful." As Elijah stepped onto the empty street, a black car began rolling slowly behind him. Elijah knew his time was running out. A suffocating weight pressed against his chest as he walked briskly through the empty street. He glanced around, not a soul in sight. But he knew. Somewhere in the shadows, someone was watching. The USB drive in his pocket carried the video that could change everything. Proof that Amelia had been taken by members of the Order of Orion. The men with the gold rings. The ones who controlled this city from the shadows. Elijah had to bring it into the light. Elijah stood in front of Catherine DuPont's apartment, a deep sense of unease creeping through his body. The door was slightly ajar, a bad sign. His breath came fast, his fingers tightening around the USB drive, his last lifeline. Slowly, he pushed the door open. His knuckles tensed from the pressure. The hinges let out a faint creak, revealing a room shrouded in darkness. The air carried the faint scent of old documents and Catherine's familiar perfume. But something was off. Too quiet. The only light in the room came from a laptop left open on the desk, its screen flickering with an unpublished news article. Journalist Elijah Carter suspected of spreading false information. Police investigating. Elijah took a step back, his heart hammering. Who wrote this? And why was it ready to go live before anything had even happened? Behind him, a voice broke the silence. "You got here faster than I expected, Carter." Elijah spun around, a cold shock coursing through his veins. His chest tightened, his blood turned to ice. It wasn't fear, it was betrayal. Catherine stood near the doorway, arms crossed, her expression void of warmth. Her gaze was steady, unreadable, as if the person he once knew had never existed. "Catherine, what are you doing?" She sighed, shaking her head. "Who do you think you're fighting against, Elijah? I warned you, some things aren't meant to be exposed. Did you really believe you could bring them down?" Elijah couldn't believe what he was hearing. The woman he had trusted, the one who had helped him chase down leads, was part of the very system he had been trying to dismantle. Memories flashed through his mind like a film reel. The investigations, the close calls, the nights spent chasing the truth together. And then it hit him. This betrayal didn't just happen tonight. It had been happening all along. He thought back to the first time Catherine approached him, handing him leads that seemed too convenient. He remembered the mysterious call she received the night before they found key documents, a call she dismissed as unimportant, but her eyes had said otherwise. He remembered the ambush at the docks, an ambush no one should have known about. Back then, he brushed it off as coincidence, but now everything lined up. Catherine had been playing him from the very beginning. Elijah exhaled slowly, his voice low and steady. "You sold me out." It wasn't just anger, it was the heartbreak of trusting someone in a world built on deception. Catherine shrugged, but for a fleeting moment, a trace of hesitation flickered in her eyes, a glimpse of something real. Then just as quickly, it was gone. Her voice was light, detached, but colder than ever. "No, Elijah, I just chose to survive. You, on the other hand, never even had a chance." Elijah narrowed his eyes, instinctively stepping back. But before he could react, the door behind him swung open. Two men in black suits stepped in, their shadows stretching across the floor. They didn't rush. They didn't need to. They already knew Elijah had nowhere to run. One of them ran a finger over the gold ring on his hand, his gaze sharp, assessing his target before striking. "Carter, you've gone too far." The voice was deep, unwavering. Elijah clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. The rage inside him burned hot, but he couldn't let it consume him. Not now, his eyes locked onto Catherine's. No anger, no surprise, just a quiet, endless sorrow. Why, he wanted to ask, but he knew no answer she gave would ever be the truth. The next morning, the news spread everywhere. Journalist Elijah Carter has mysteriously disappeared. Police suspect he fled the city after being accused of spreading false information. No investigation was launched. No questions were asked, as if Elijah Carter had never existed. Catherine stared at the screen of her phone, a cold emptiness creeping into her chest. She had thought she would be used to this by now. This wasn't the first time a name had been erased from the world, as if it had never been real. And this time she had been part of it. That night she cleaned everything up, burned the remaining documents, deleted the messages, the calls, as if she had never known Elijah Carter. Time passed. The world moved on. 3 months later, Catherine had moved to a smaller, quieter apartment. She no longer read the news in the mornings, no longer cared about scandals, political secrets, or anything connected to the world she had once been consumed by. She convinced herself she had moved on, until today. The doorbell rang in the early morning. When Catherine opened the door, the hallway was empty. Only a worn envelope lay on the floor. No postage, no return address. A shiver ran down her spine as she picked it up. The handwriting on the envelope was so familiar it made her chest tighten. It was Elijah's. She froze. This couldn't be possible. Elijah was gone. Dead. Yet her trembling hands opened the letter. Inside was a hastily folded note, the handwriting messy as if written in a hurry. "Catherine, if you're reading this, it means I'm still alive, at least in some form. They didn't kill me, but I'm no longer myself, and I think you understand what that means. 3 months ago, you chose to betray me, but I don't blame you. I thought I knew who you were, but maybe I was wrong, or maybe you're just like me, someone who lost themselves a long time ago. But there's still a chance, Catherine. If you truly want to know the truth, if you truly want to make this right, Amelia's alive. She escaped. She knows the secret they're willing to kill to protect, and she can help you understand everything. But this time the choice is yours. No one is forcing you, no threats, no obligations. Only one question remains. Will you continue pretending this never happened? Or will you search for the truth? No signature. Only desperate, hurried words, as if Elijah himself wasn't sure this letter would ever reach her. Catherine gripped the paper, her heart pounding. Amelia was alive. The shiver running down her spine turned into something else. Fear, an awakening. For 3 months she had told herself she didn't care anymore, that it was over. But now the past had come knocking again, and this time she couldn't turn away. Catherine sat still, the letter clutched in her hands. Her breath was slow, but inside her a storm was rising. 3 months ago, she had chosen to survive. She had turned her back on Elijah, on herself, but now Elijah had given her a new choice, a single sheet of paper, a hurried message, and she was once again standing at a crossroads. Outside, the rain drizzled down, droplets streaking against the window. Catherine closed her eyes, took a deep breath. Then, she stood up. For the first time in months, she knew where she had to go. This story wasn't over. This is not just a story about a missing ballerina. It is a story about those erased from history simply because they knew too much. A story of silenced voices, of truths buried beneath the dazzling facade of power, and of those who were never given the right to speak. Elijah Carter was not the first to disappear, and he certainly wouldn't be the last. But perhaps somewhere in the shadows, there were still those fighting in silence, those who refused to accept that the truth could be hidden forever. There are secrets people are willing to kill to protect, but there are also those willing to die to bring them into the light.